When tech mogul Bryce Ellington insulted working-class women on live TV, he didn't expect to fall for one, especially not Zariah, the new maid who challenges everything he thought he knew about love, class, and himself. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Bryce Ellington's penthouse office. At 29, he had already achieved what most people couldn't accomplish in a lifetime. His tech company, Ellington AI, was worth billions, and his personal fortune kept growing every day. "Mr. Ellington, the reporter from Lifestyle Today is here," announced his assistant through the intercom. Bryce sighed. He hated interviews, especially these fluff pieces about his personal life, but his PR team insisted it was good for the company image. "Send her in," he replied coldly. The reporter, a young woman with an eager smile and a recorder in hand, entered his office. Her eyes widened at the sleek modern design and the panoramic view of the city. "Mr. Ellington, thank you so much for making time for this interview. Our readers are fascinated by successful young entrepreneurs like yourself." Bryce didn't smile. "Let's get this over with. I have a board meeting in an hour." The interview began with the usual questions about his success, his morning routine, and his diet. Bryce gave short, rehearsed answers. He'd done this dance before. "Now, our readers are very interested in your personal life, Mr. Ellington. Are you currently dating anyone?" the reporter asked, leaning forward. "No," Bryce replied curtly. "I don't have time for relationships. But surely a handsome, successful man like yourself must have standards. What kind of woman would catch your eye?" Bryce leaned back in his chair. "Someone intelligent, ambitious, from a good family. Someone who understands this world." He gestured to the office around him. "My equal." "And what about someone different? Our readers love unexpected love stories. Would you ever date, say, someone who worked for you? Like an assistant or even a maid?" Bryce laughed coldly. "A maid? That's insane. We're from different worlds. What would we even talk about? Bleach and floors?" He shook his head dismissively. "I don't mean to sound harsh, but I believe people should stick to their own social circles. It's just simpler that way." The reporter nodded, a strange gleam in her eye. Bryce knew that look. She had just gotten the juicy quote she wanted. 3 days later, Bryce was furious. His PR director, Vanessa, stood nervously in his office as he paced back and forth. "Elitist tech billionaire mocks working class. This is a disaster," he shouted, throwing the magazine on his desk. His quote about maids was plastered across social media, with thousands of angry comments. "We're handling it, Bryce," Vanessa assured him. "We've released a statement saying you were misquoted." "I wasn't misquoted, I said those things." Bryce ran a hand through his dark hair. "But I wasn't trying to insult anyone. I was just being honest." "Well, honesty isn't always the best policy when it comes to public relations," Vanessa sighed. "Look, this will blow over. Just lay low for a while, and don't give any more interviews without me present." After Vanessa left, Bryce stared out at the city below. He didn't understand why people were so upset. He had worked hard for everything he had. Starting with nothing, he had built his company from the ground up. Why should he apologize for his success or his opinions? His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. "Hello, Mother," he answered, his voice instantly cooler. "Bryce, darling," came the smooth voice of Eleanor Ellington. "I saw the article. Very unbecoming. I don't need a lecture right now." "I'm not lecturing, just reminding you that appearances matter. Your father understood that." Bryce's jaw tightened. "My father left us when I was 10. I don't think he understood much about responsibility. He left because he fell for that waitress," Eleanor said bitterly. "Threw away everything for a woman who wasn't even on our level. Don't make the same mistake." "Is there a point to this call, Mother?" "Just checking on my investment. Ellington AI is partially built with family money, remember? I'd hate to see bad press affect our stock prices." After hanging up, Bryce felt the familiar emptiness settling in his chest. His mother never called just to talk. It was always about money or appearances, and his father, well, Richard Ellington had abandoned them for a younger woman, leaving Bryce with a wound that never quite healed. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Ellington, the new cleaning service is here for the initial assessment of your home. Tell them to come back another time," Bryce snapped. "Sir, you've rescheduled twice already. Your regular service quit last month, and the temporary cleaners leave tomorrow." Bryce sighed. "Fine. Tell them I'll meet them at the house in 30 minutes. Bryce's mansion in the exclusive Highland Park neighborhood was a masterpiece of modern architecture. With 6 bedrooms, an indoor pool, and a state-of-the-art security system, it was featured in several design magazines. But lately, he hardly spent time there. It felt too empty, too silent. As he pulled into the driveway in his black Lamborghini, he noticed a modest white van with elite cleaning services printed on the side. A woman was taking cleaning supplies out of the back. Bryce got out of his car and approached her. "You're early," he said, checking his watch. The woman turned around and Bryce felt an unexpected jolt. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with warm brown skin and large expressive eyes. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore a simple uniform with the cleaning company's logo. "I'm actually right on time, Mr. Ellington," she replied calmly. "I'm Zariah Moore, from Elite Cleaning Services." She extended her hand. Bryce hesitated before shaking it. Her grip was firm and confident. "I'll need to see the layout of the house and discuss your specific requirements," she continued professionally. "Our company prides itself on personalized service." "My assistant usually handles these details," Bryce said dismissively, already reaching for his phone. "I understand, but as your primary cleaner, I prefer to hear the requirements directly from the client. It eliminates miscommunication." Bryce looked at her, slightly taken aback by her directness. Most service people he dealt with were intimidated by him. This woman, Zariah, seemed unfazed. "Fine," he said shortly. "Follow me." As they walked through the house, Bryce found himself watching Zariah's reactions. She took in the expensive artwork, the designer furniture, and the cutting-edge technology without seeming impressed. She simply nodded and made notes on a small tablet. "You have a beautiful home," she said, but her tone was merely polite, not awed. "Thank you," Bryce replied automatically. "It was featured in Architectural Digest last year." "I know. I saw the article." She paused by a large window overlooking the garden. "Though I would have oriented the east wing differently to maximize the natural light." Bryce raised an eyebrow. "You know about architecture?" A flicker of something, pride, pain, crossed her face. "I have some background in it, yes." Before he could ask more, Zariah moved on, asking practical questions about his schedule, preferences for cleaning products, and areas that needed special attention. "I'll be here 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday," she explained. "I understand you work from home sometimes?" "Occasionally," Bryce nodded. "I'll make sure to be as unobtrusive as possible. I can also work around your schedule if you have important calls or meetings." As they finished the tour in the kitchen, Bryce's German Shepherd, Max, trotted in from the backyard through the dog door. Usually wary of strangers, Max went straight to Zariah, tail wagging. "Hello there," she said softly, kneeling to pet him. "Aren't you handsome?" Max leaned into her touch, looking up at her adoringly. "He's not usually this friendly with people he doesn't know," Bryce remarked, surprised. "Dogs are good judges of character," Zariah replied with a small smile. "What's his name?" "Max, he's 4. He's beautiful." She scratched behind Max's ears in exactly the right spot, making the dog close his eyes in bliss. "I have a soft spot for German Shepherds. My grandfather had one when I was growing up." There was a moment of silence as Zariah continued petting Max. Bryce found himself staring at her hands. They were elegant, despite being slightly calloused from work. "Well, I think I have everything I need," Zariah finally said, standing up. "I'll start on Monday at 9 a.m. if that works for you." "That's fine," Bryce said, suddenly eager to end the conversation. Something about this woman made him uncomfortable. "My assistant will make sure you have the entry codes and alarm information." Zariah nodded professionally. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Ellington. I look forward to working with you." As she walked back to her van, Max whined at the door, watching her leave. "Stop it," Bryce muttered to the dog. "She's just the maid." But even as he said it, he found himself watching her drive away, a strange feeling settling in his chest. Monday morning arrived, and Bryce had forgotten about the new cleaning arrangement until he heard movement downstairs. He had spent the weekend working and was planning to go into the office late. When he came down to the kitchen in his pajama bottoms and t-shirt, he was startled to find Zariah there, unloading a dishwasher he hadn't even realized was full. "Good morning, Mr. Ellington," she said, as composed as if she'd been expecting him. "Morning," he mumbled, suddenly aware of his casual attire and bedhead. He felt oddly self-conscious, which was ridiculous. She was the maid, for heaven's sake. "I've already done the living room and den," she informed him. "I'll be starting on the upstairs bathrooms next, unless you'd prefer I wait until you've left for work." "No, that's fine," Bryce said, making his way to the coffee machine. He pressed a button and waited for his espresso to brew, acutely aware of Zariah's presence behind him. "You have a lot of books," she commented as she wiped down the countertops. "I noticed your library. It's impressive." Bryce glanced at her. "You read?" The moment the words left his mouth, he realized how condescending they sounded. Zoraya's hands paused briefly before continuing their work. "Yes, Mr. Ellington. Many people do regardless of their profession," she replied evenly, but there was a hint of steel in her voice. Bryce felt his face grow warm. "I didn't mean—" "It's fine," she cut him off politely. "I noticed you have an extensive collection of architecture books. I particularly admire your first edition of Le Corbusier's Towards a New Architecture." Bryce stared at her, genuinely surprised. "You know Le Corbusier?" "I studied architecture at Howard University," Zoraya said matter-of-factly, "before I had to leave in my senior year." "Why did you leave?" The question slipped out before he could stop himself. Zoraya's expression closed off. "Personal reasons." She moved to the sink and began washing it thoroughly. "Will you be working from home today, Mr. Ellington? I'll try to be quiet if you are." Bryce recognized the deflection, but didn't push. "No, I'll be heading to the office shortly." He took his coffee and retreated to his bedroom, oddly rattled by the brief exchange. Why had he asked her such a personal question, and why did he care about the answer? As he showered and dressed for work, Bryce found himself thinking about Zoraya, an architecture student turned maid. There was a story there, one that made him uncomfortably curious. When he came back downstairs, dressed in an expensive suit, Zoraya was nowhere to be seen, but he could hear the distant sound of vacuuming from the second floor. Max was sitting at the bottom of the stairs, looking up as if waiting for Zoraya to reappear. "Traitor," Bryce muttered to the dog as he grabbed his keys and headed out. Over the next 2 weeks, Bryce found himself increasingly aware of Zoraya's presence in his home. Though she was quiet and efficient, never intruding on his space when he worked from home, he couldn't help noticing little things about her. The way she hummed softly to herself when she thought no one was listening. How she always took time to pet Max and bring him treats. The fact that sometimes, when she didn't know Bryce was watching, her expression would fall into one of deep sadness. One Wednesday, Bryce decided to work from home. He told himself it was because he had a migraine coming on, but in truth, he found himself scheduling his work-from-home days to coincide with Zoraya's cleaning schedule. From his office, he could hear her moving around the house. The sound was oddly comforting, making the large mansion feel less empty. Around noon, he emerged from his office to find her dusting the bookshelves in the living room. She had taken one of his architecture books down and was carefully examining a page. "Interested in Frank Lloyd Wright?" he asked, making her jump slightly. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, returning the book to its place. "I shouldn't have—" "It's fine," Bryce interrupted. "You can look at the books." "I don't mind." Zoraya nodded, but he could see she was embarrassed at being caught. "I've always admired Wright's organic approach to architecture," she said after a moment. "The way he integrated buildings with their natural surroundings. Fallingwater is his masterpiece," Bryce found himself saying. "I visited it last year. I've always wanted to see it in person," Zoraya replied, a genuine smile lighting up her face for the first time since he'd met her. The cantilevered design over the waterfall must be even more breathtaking in reality. Bryce was struck by her smile. It transformed her entire face, making her eyes crinkle at the corners. He realized with a jolt that she was beautiful, not just pretty. How had he not noticed before? "It is," he said, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. "Maybe you'll see it someday." "Maybe," she agreed, but her smile faded, replaced by a more practical expression. "I'm sorry, I should get back to work. Did you need something, Mr. Ellington?" "No, I was just taking a break," he finished lamely. "Don't let me interrupt you." As he turned to go back to his office, his phone rang. Seeing his mother's name on the screen, he grimaced, but answered. "Hello, Mother?" "Bryce, darling, I need you to attend the Children's Hospital Gala with me next weekend. The Wilsons will be there, and their daughter Audrey is back from Europe. She'd be perfect for you." Bryce rolled his eyes, aware that Zoraya was still in the room but trying to appear busy with her dusting. "I'm not interested in being set up, Mother." "Don't be difficult, Bryce. Audrey is exactly the kind of woman you should be seen with. Ivy League educated, from a good family, connections in all the right places. I have a company to run. I don't have time for dating." "Nonsense. You need to think about your image, especially after that disastrous interview. Being seen with someone like Audrey would help people forget your unfortunate comments." Bryce glanced at Zoraya, who was studiously avoiding looking in his direction, though he was certain she could hear every word. "I'll think about it," he said finally, just to end the conversation. After hanging up, an awkward silence filled the room. Zoraya continued working, her back to him. "My mother," Bryce said unnecessarily. "She's persistent." "Mothers usually are," Zoraya replied neutrally. especially when they want what's best for their children. Something in her tone made him ask, "Do you speak from experience?" Zariah paused. "Yes," she said simply. "My mother has always wanted the best for me, even when we disagreed about what that was." Before Bryce could respond, his phone buzzed with a text message. It was from his PR director. "News cycle finally moving on from Maid comment. Keep low profile and no more interviews without approval." He glanced up to find Zariah watching him, her expression unreadable. "Something wrong, Mr. Ellington?" "No," he said quickly, shoving his phone in his pocket. "Everything's fine." But as he returned to his office, Bryce couldn't shake the feeling that nothing was fine. For the first time in years, he felt ashamed of himself, and he didn't like the feeling one bit. Friday afternoon found Bryce working from home again. He told his assistant it was because he needed to focus without office distractions, but the truth was more complicated. He was in the kitchen making a protein shake when he heard a soft noise. Following the sound, he found Zariah in the laundry room, her back to the door, shoulders shaking slightly. She was crying. Bryce froze, unsure what to do. He should walk away and give her privacy. That would be the appropriate thing to do. Instead, he cleared his throat. Zariah spun around, quickly wiping her eyes. "Mr. Ellington, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you come in." "Are you okay?" he asked awkwardly. "I'm fine," she said automatically, straightening her uniform. "Just having a moment. It won't affect my work." "I'm not worried about your work," Bryce said, surprising himself. "You're crying." Zariah took a deep breath. "It's nothing. Personal matter." Bryce knew he should leave it at that. Her problems weren't his concern. But instead, he heard himself saying, "Can I help?" Zariah looked genuinely startled by the offer. "No, but thank you for asking." She hesitated, then added, "It's my mother. She's not doing well. The medical bills are challenging." "Is she ill?" Bryce asked, stepping further into the room. "She has multiple sclerosis," Zariah explained reluctantly. "It's been progressing faster lately. It's her birthday. I always take her favorite cake from this special bakery across town, but my car broke down this morning. I'll have to take the bus, which means I won't make it to the bakery before it closes." "I can drive you," Bryce offered, the words out of his mouth before he had time to think. Zariah stared at him. "What?" "I said I can drive you to the bakery and to see your mother if you want." Bryce couldn't believe what he was saying, but he didn't take it back. "Why would you do that?" Zariah asked, clearly suspicious. Good question, Bryce thought. Why would he? "Because your mother shouldn't miss out on her birthday cake," he said finally. "When do you finish here?" "Around 4, Zariah said slowly, still looking at him as if trying to figure out his angle. "I'll be ready," Bryce said, and walked out of the laundry room before she could object further. Back in his office, Bryce stared at his computer screen, not seeing the spreadsheet in front of him. What had possessed him to make such an offer? He never involved himself in his employees' personal lives. And Zariah wasn't even his employee. She worked for the cleaning service. At precisely 4 o'clock, there was a knock on his office door. Zariah stood there, changed out of her uniform into simple jeans and a blue blouse. With her hair down around her shoulders, she looked younger and even more beautiful. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. "I can figure something out." "I said I would drive you, and I will," Bryce replied, standing up and grabbing his keys. "Let's go." The drive to the bakery was mostly silent. Bryce could feel Zariah's tension beside him in the passenger seat of his Audi. "Your car is very nice," she said finally. "Thanks." Bryce navigated through traffic. "Where is this bakery?" "Downtown on Maple Street, Sweet Dreams Bakery." When they arrived, Zariah hurried inside while Bryce waited in the car. She emerged a few minutes later carrying a pink box, a relieved smile on her face. "They had one left," she said as she got back in the car. "My mum loves their strawberry cream cake." "Where to now?" Bryce asked. "Cedars Sinai Medical Center," Zariah replied, her smile fading. "My mum was admitted yesterday. Her symptoms flared up." Bryce nodded and headed toward the hospital. Again they drove in silence, but it was less uncomfortable now. "Can I ask you something?" Bryce said as they neared the hospital. "Sure." "You said you studied architecture at Howard University. Why did you leave?" Zariah was quiet for so long that Bryce thought she wouldn't answer. Finally she said, "My mom got sick. The insurance only covered so much. I had to drop out and get a job." She looked out the window. "I was 1 semester away from graduating." Bryce didn't know what to say. The unfairness of it struck him deeply. "I'll go back someday," Zariah continued, her voice stronger. "I haven't given up on that dream. It's just on hold." When they arrived at the hospital, Bryce pulled into a parking space. "I'll wait here," he said. Zariah looked surprised. You don't have to wait. I can take the bus home. It's no trouble, Bryce insisted. Take your time with your mother. Zariah studied him for a moment, then nodded. Thank you, Mr. Ellington. Bryce, he said suddenly. You can call me Bryce. A small smile touched her lips. Thank you, Bryce. As he watched her walk into the hospital, cake box carefully balanced in her hands, Bryce felt something shift inside him. Something he couldn't quite name, but it made his chest feel both tight and warm at the same time. He turned on the radio, trying to distract himself from the strange new feelings. A news program was discussing the week's top stories. And in tech news, billionaire Bryce Ellington has managed to weather the storm of criticism following his controversial comments about dating outside his social class. Ellington AI stock has rebounded, and the company's new artificial intelligence platform is generating positive buzz in Silicon Valley. Bryce quickly changed the station, settling on classical music instead. As the soothing notes filled the car, he leaned his head back and closed his eyes. What was he doing? Why was he waiting outside a hospital for his maid? What would his mother say if she could see him now? An hour later, Zariah returned to the car. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but she was smiling. How is she? Bryce asked, as Zariah buckled her seatbelt. Having a good day, thankfully. The cake made her so happy. Zariah turned to look at him directly. Thank you for this. You didn't have to do it. It's nothing, Bryce said, uncomfortable with her gratitude. It's not nothing, Zariah insisted quietly. Not to me. Not to my mom. As they drove back to his house where her van was still parked, Bryce found himself wanting to know more about Zariah, about her life, her dreams, her struggles. It was a foreign feeling for him, this genuine interest in another person. Do you live nearby? He asked, breaking the silence. In East Hollywood, Zariah replied. It's a small apartment, but it's close to the hospital. And you clean houses to pay the bills? Yes, I work for Elite Cleaning during the week. Weekends, I pick up shifts at a cafe near my place. She glanced at him. 2 jobs, plus taking care of Mum. It doesn't leave much time for anything else. Like finishing your degree, Bryce said. Exactly, but I'll get back to it. I've never been a quitter. Something in her tone made Bryce believe her completely. This woman had a strength he rarely encountered in his world of privilege and entitlement. When they reached his house, Zariah got out of the car and headed to her van. But before getting in, she turned back. Thank you again, Bryce. The way she said his name sent an unexpected warmth through him. You're welcome, Zariah. As he watched her drive away, Bryce suddenly remembered his viral interview comment. A maid? That's insane. We're from different worlds. What would we even talk about? Bleach and floors? How wrong he had been. In just a few short weeks, Zariah Moore had made him question everything he thought he knew about himself and the walls he had built around his heart. And that terrified him more than anything. The next Monday, Bryce found himself listening for the sound of Zariah's van in the driveway. When he heard it, he felt an unexpected flutter in his stomach. Ridiculous, he told himself. She's just the maid. But she wasn't just the maid, and he knew it. Their trip to the hospital had changed something between them. Bryce came downstairs dressed in casual clothes instead of his usual suit. He'd told his office he was working from home today. Again. Good morning, Mr. Ellington. I mean Bryce. Zariah greeted him with a small smile as she unloaded her cleaning supplies in the kitchen. Morning, he replied, trying to sound casual. How's your mother doing? Zariah's face brightened. Better, thank you. They've adjusted her medication and she's back home now. She paused. She keeps asking about the nice young man who made sure she got her birthday cake. Bryce felt a warmth spread through his chest. I didn't do much. You did more than you know, Zariah said softly, then quickly changed the subject. I noticed some water damage in the ceiling of the East Wing guest bathroom. You might want to have someone look at that. I'll call my contractor. Bryce nodded, grateful for the shift to practical matters. Coffee? Zariah looked surprised by the offer. I don't want to interrupt your morning routine. You're not, Bryce insisted, already moving to the coffee machine. How do you take it? Black with 1 sugar, thank you. As Bryce prepared their coffees, Max trotted into the kitchen and went straight to Zariah, tail wagging furiously. Hello, handsome, she cooed, kneeling to pet him. Did you miss me? He mopes around on days you're not here, Bryce admitted, handing her a mug. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and Bryce felt a jolt of electricity at the contact. From Zariah's quick intake of breath, he suspected she felt it too. Thank you, she said, taking a careful sip. Perfect. For a moment, they stood in awkward silence, drinking their coffee. I should get started, Zariah finally said. Lots to do today. Of course, Bryce nodded. I'll be in my office if you need anything. Throughout the morning, Bryce found it impossible to concentrate on work. He kept thinking of excuses to leave his office and accidentally run into Zariah as she moved through the house. During one such encounter, as she dusted the hallway outside his office, Bryce decided to ask the question that had been bothering him. "Can I ask you something personal?" Zariah paused her work. "You can ask." "I might not answer." "Fair enough," Bryce smiled slightly. "Why cleaning? With your education and intelligence, you could do other jobs. Something related to architecture, maybe." Zariah was quiet for a moment. "I tried," she finally said. "For months after I left school, I applied to every architecture firm in the city, but without a degree." She shrugged. "And then I found elite cleaning. The pay is good. The hours are flexible so I can care for my mom and—" She met his eyes directly. "There's no shame in honest work, Bryce." The subtle rebuke hit home. "I didn't mean to imply—" "Didn't you?" Her voice was gentle but firm. "Your interview comments suggested otherwise." Bryce winced. "You saw that?" "It was hard to miss," Zariah replied. "It was trending on Twitter for days." "I regret saying those things," Bryce admitted, surprising himself with his honesty. "I spoke without thinking." "Or perhaps you spoke exactly what you were thinking," Zariah suggested, her eyes studying him intently. "The question is whether you still think that way." Before Bryce could answer, his phone rang. Seeing it was his executive assistant, he excused himself and retreated to his office. "Bryce, the board is asking questions about your absence," his assistant told him. "Mr. Patterson specifically wanted to know if you were ill." "Tell them I'm working on the new AI platform rollout," Bryce replied. "I need quiet to finalize the details." After hanging up, Bryce stared at his laptop screen, but his mind kept drifting back to Zariah's question. Did he still think that way? Had his opinion of people like her, people from different social backgrounds, really changed? Or was he just attracted to her and making exceptions? The thought troubled him more than he wanted to admit. Over the next 2 weeks, a strange new routine developed. Bryce found himself working from home more often, particularly on days when Zariah was scheduled to clean. Their brief conversations gradually extended, becoming longer and more personal. He learned that Zariah had grown up in Oakland with her mother, a high school English teacher. Her father had died when she was 12. She'd won a scholarship to Howard University and had been at the top of her class until her mother's diagnosis forced her to return to California. In turn, Bryce found himself sharing things he rarely discussed with anyone. How his father had abandoned the family for a waitress he met on a business trip. How his mother had become bitter and obsessed with social status afterward. How he'd built his company partly to prove he didn't need his father's approval or his mother's family money. "Have you spoken to your father since he left?" Zariah asked one afternoon as they sat on the patio. She had finished cleaning, but neither seemed in a hurry to end their conversation. "Once," Bryce admitted, "when I sold my first company at 25. He called to congratulate me and to ask for money." "What did you do?" "I hung up on him." Bryce stared into his coffee cup. "He tried calling back a few times, but I blocked his number." "You're still angry," Zariah observed. "Wouldn't you be?" Bryce asked. "He threw away our family for a fling." "I would be," Zariah nodded, "but I'd also be sad for the relationship I never got to have with him." Her words hit Bryce hard. Sad. Yes, beneath the anger, there was a deep sadness he'd never allowed himself to acknowledge. "What about your father?" he asked, wanting to shift the focus from himself. "You said he died when you were young." "Cancer," Zariah replied, her eyes growing distant. "He was an architect. That's what inspired me to study it." She smiled softly. "He used to take me to construction sites when I was little. He'd lift me onto his shoulders so I could see the buildings taking shape." "He sounds like a good father," Bryce said quietly. "The best," Zariah agreed. She glanced at her watch and stood up. "I should go. My mom has a doctor's appointment this afternoon." "Is her car still not working?" Bryce asked, also standing. "The repairs were too expensive," Zariah sighed. "I'm saving up, but in the meantime, we're managing with the bus and Uber when necessary." "I could," Bryce started to offer, then stopped himself. He'd learned that Zariah had a fierce pride about accepting help. "You could what?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Nothing." Bryce shook his head. "I hope the appointment goes well." As he watched her drive away, Bryce made a mental note to contact Elite Cleaning Services. Maybe he could arrange something to help Zariah without offending her pride. "Absolutely not," said Vanessa, Bryce's PR director, as they sat in his downtown office the next day. "The last thing you need right now is to be linked to some charity case, Maid." "She's not a charity case," Bryce replied sharply. She's an intelligent woman who had to put her education on hold to care for her sick mother. Vanessa raised her eyebrows. My, you've certainly learned a lot about your cleaning lady. Don't call her that, Bryce snapped. That's what she is, Bryce, Vanessa said bluntly. And after your comments in that interview went viral, any special interest you show in someone like her will be twisted by the media. They'll either paint you as a hypocrite or suggest something inappropriate is going on. Nothing inappropriate is going on, Bryce insisted, even as he felt a flush creep up his neck. I just want to help her finish her degree. A noble intention, Vanessa said, her voice softening slightly. But as your PR advisor, I have to tell you it's a bad idea. If you want to help, make an anonymous donation to a scholarship fund for architecture students. Don't get personally involved. Bryce knew Vanessa was right from a PR perspective, but the thought of not seeing Zariah regularly made his chest tighten uncomfortably. Just think about it, Vanessa advised as she gathered her things to leave. By the way, your mother called me. She wants to know why you haven't RSVP'd to the Children's Hospital Gala. She says Audrey Wilson is expecting you to be her escort. Bryce groaned. I'm not interested in Audrey Wilson. She's exactly the kind of woman you should be seen with right now, Vanessa pointed out. Impeccable family, Harvard education, charity work. She'd be perfect for your image. After Vanessa left, Bryce sat at his desk, staring out at the city skyline. When had his life become so focused on appearances, on what other people thought, on what was good for his image? He thought of Zariah, who worked 2 jobs to care for her mother and still maintained her dignity and dreams. There was an authenticity to her that was rare in his world of wealth and privilege. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. Confirmed you as Audrey's escort for the gala. Wear the Armani and get a haircut. Bryce tossed the phone onto his desk in frustration. His mother was still trying to control his life, just as she had since his father left, and he was still letting her, because it was easier than fighting. Just like it was easier to maintain the walls around his heart than to risk being hurt again. Friday afternoon, Bryce was in his home office when he heard a crash followed by a cry of pain. He rushed out to find Zariah in the hallway, surrounded by cleaning supplies and holding her ankle. What happened? He asked, kneeling beside her. I tripped over the vacuum cord, she winced. I'm fine, just twisted my ankle. Let me see, Bryce insisted, gently examining her ankle. It was already beginning to swell. You need ice on this. Can you stand? Zariah tried, but gasped in pain. Without hesitation, Bryce scooped her up in his arms and carried her to the living room sofa. This isn't necessary, she protested, though her arms instinctively went around his neck. Humor me, Bryce replied, trying to ignore how right it felt to hold her. He set her down carefully on the sofa and propped her ankle on a cushion. Stay here. I'll get some ice. When he returned with an ice pack, Zariah was looking embarrassed. I'm so sorry about this. I've never had an accident at a client's home before. Stop apologizing, Bryce said firmly, placing the ice pack on her ankle. Accidents happen. He sat beside her on the sofa, acutely aware of how close they were. A strand of her hair had come loose from her bun, and he resisted the urge to tuck it behind her ear. Thank you, Zariah said softly. You're being very kind. Don't sound so surprised. Bryce smiled slightly. I'm not always the cold-hearted CEO from that interview. I know that now, Zariah replied, her eyes meeting his. Though I must admit, when I first started working here, I was prepared to dislike you. Because of the interview? Partly, she nodded. And partly because of your reputation in general. The ruthless businessman who doesn't care about anyone but himself. Is that what people say about me? Bryce asked, genuinely curious. Some do, Zariah admitted. But they don't know you like I do now. The way she said it, like I do now, made Bryce's heart race. What exactly did she see in him? And why did her opinion suddenly matter so much? I should call a doctor to look at your ankle, he said, trying to regain his composure. It's just a sprain, Zariah assured him. I've had worse, but I should probably get home and rest it. I'll drive you, Bryce said immediately. That's really not... I insist, he cut her off, and I won't take no for an answer. Zariah's lips curved into a smile. You're very bossy, you know that. I've been told it's one of my more charming qualities, Bryce replied with a grin. He helped her to his car, supporting most of her weight as she hopped on one foot. Once she was settled in the passenger seat, he went back to gather her purse and phone. As he picked up her phone from the kitchen counter, it lit up with a notification. Without meaning to, Bryce saw the message preview. Final notice. Rent payment due in 3 days or eviction proceedings will begin. He quickly looked away, feeling like he'd intruded on something private. but the message stayed with him as he returned to the car and started the drive to Zariah's apartment. She lived in a modest building in East Hollywood, nothing like the luxury high-rises Bryce was used to. The elevator was out of order, so he helped her up 2 flights of stairs to her apartment. "You really don't need to come in," Zariah said as she unlocked the door. "I'll be fine. At least let me help you get settled," Bryce insisted. The apartment was small but neat and tastefully decorated with colorful textiles and framed architectural drawings. A middle-aged woman with Zariah's same warm eyes sat in a recliner by the window, a book in her lap. "Mom, this is Bryce Ellington, my employer," Zariah introduced him. "Bryce, this is my mother, Loretta Moore." "The birthday cake man," Loretta said with a warm smile. "Zariah told me what you did. That was very kind." "It was nothing, Mrs. Moore," Bryce replied, suddenly feeling shy under the woman's knowing gaze. "It's Ms.," she corrected gently. "And kindness is never nothing." She noticed Zariah's limp. "What happened to you, baby?" "Just a twisted ankle, Mom. I'll be fine." Bryce helped Zariah to the sofa and made sure she was comfortable before reluctantly saying goodbye. As he was leaving, Loretta followed him to the door. "My daughter doesn't accept help easily," she said quietly. "She got that from her father. But sometimes, even the strongest people need someone to lean on." "I've noticed," Bryce smiled. "She's remarkable." "Yes, she is," Loretta agreed, studying him intently. "And she deserves someone who sees that, someone who sees her for who she really is, not what she does for a living." The gentle challenge in her words was clear, and Bryce felt himself flush under her gaze. "It was nice meeting you, Ms. Moore," he said, suddenly eager to escape the small apartment and the feelings it stirred in him. "You too, Mr. Ellington," she replied with a knowing smile. "I hope we'll see you again." The Children's Hospital Gala was everything Bryce hated about high society events. Wealthy people in expensive clothes, pretending to care about charity, while really just networking and showing off. Audrey Wilson, his mother's choice of date for him, was objectively beautiful, with her blonde hair styled in perfect waves and her designer gown showing off her slim figure. She was also mind-numbingly boring. "Daddy just bought another vineyard in Napa," she was saying as they stood near the bar. "You must come visit. The views are simply divine." Bryce nodded politely, but his mind was elsewhere. He kept thinking about Zariah. Was her ankle feeling better? Had she managed to pay her rent? Should he have offered to help? "Bryce, darling," his mother appeared at his side, immaculate in a silver gown. "The Petersons want to discuss a potential investment in Ellington AI. Come say hello." She turned to Audrey with a practiced smile. "You don't mind, do you, dear?" "Not at all, Mrs. Ellington," Audrey replied sweetly. "I'll get another champagne." As his mother led him across the ballroom, she squeezed his arm painfully. "Stop looking so miserable," she hissed. "Everyone is watching." "I don't care," Bryce replied, pulling his arm free. "I didn't want to be here in the first place." "This is important for your image," Eleanor insisted, "especially after that disastrous interview. The Wilsons are one of the most respected families in the city. An alliance with them would be beneficial." "An alliance?" Bryce scoffed. "This isn't medieval Europe, Mother. I'm not interested in Audrey Wilson." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "Is there someone else?" The image of Zariah flashed in Bryce's mind, but he quickly pushed it away. "No," he said firmly. "I'm just tired of you trying to control my life." "I'm trying to protect you," Eleanor snapped. "Your father threw away everything for a woman beneath his station. I won't let you make the same mistake." "My father left because he was unhappy," Bryce replied coldly. "Maybe if you hadn't been so obsessed with status and appearances, he might have stayed." Eleanor recoiled as if he'd slapped her. "How dare you?" she whispered, her face pale with fury. "After everything I've sacrificed for you." Before Bryce could respond, they were interrupted by a group of board members and their wives. The moment passed, but Bryce knew the conversation wasn't over. The rest of the evening dragged on endlessly. Bryce went through the motions, making small talk and smiling for photos, but he felt hollow inside. This world of privilege and pretense suddenly seemed shallow and meaningless. When he finally returned home after midnight, he found himself standing in his empty mansion, surrounded by expensive things that brought him no joy. On impulse, he took out his phone and pulled up the Elite Cleaning Service's website. There was a form to request specific cleaners. Without allowing himself to think too much about it, Bryce filled it out, requesting Zariah for an additional day each week. It wasn't just that he wanted to see her more often. He told himself he was trying to help her earn extra money for her rent and her mother's medical bills. that was all. But deep down, he knew it was a lie. The following Wednesday, Bryce was working in his home office when Zariah knocked on the door. "Come in," he called, trying to sound casual. She entered, looking better than she had on Friday. Her ankle seemed fully healed. "I wanted to thank you," she said, standing in the doorway, "for the extra day. I appreciate the work." "It's no problem," Bryce replied. "The house gets dirty quickly." They both knew it was a weak excuse. The mansion was far too large for one person, and Bryce was barely home enough to make a mess. "How's your ankle?" he asked, changing the subject. "Much better, thank you," Zariah replied, "and thank you again for driving me home." "It was the least I could do," Bryce said. "How's your mother?" "Good days and bad days," Zariah sighed. "But she enjoyed meeting you." An awkward silence fell between them. There was so much Bryce wanted to say, but he couldn't find the right words. "I should get back to work," Zariah finally said. "I'm starting in the library today." "Of course," Bryce nodded, returning his attention to his computer screen. A few hours later, he went looking for Zariah. The library door was ajar and he could hear her moving around inside. He was about to enter when he saw her standing by his desk, holding something in her hands. It was an old, battered sketchbook, one he hadn't seen in years. His childhood drawings of buildings and bridges, dreams he'd abandoned long ago. Zariah was carefully turning the pages, studying each sketch with interest. Occasionally, she would smile or nod appreciatively. Bryce watched her silently, feeling oddly vulnerable. Those drawings represented a part of himself he'd buried when his father left, the part that dreamed of creating beautiful spaces instead of profitable tech companies. He must have made a sound, because Zariah suddenly looked up, her eyes widening when she saw him. "I'm so sorry," she said quickly, closing the sketchbook. "I was dusting the bookshelves and it fell out. I shouldn't have looked through it." "It's okay," Bryce said, entering the room. "They're just old drawings, nothing important." "I disagree," Zariah replied, setting the sketchbook on the desk. "They're quite good, actually. You have a natural talent for spatial relationships and perspective." Bryce felt a flush of pleasure at her praise, followed immediately by embarrassment. "I was just a kid playing around." "Was that all it was?" Zariah asked perceptively. "Because these don't look like a child's doodles. They show real passion and understanding of architectural principles." Bryce was silent for a moment, then admitted, "I wanted to be an architect when I was younger, like your father." "What changed?" "My father left," Bryce said simply. "And suddenly, dreams seemed like luxuries we couldn't afford. My mother pushed me toward business school instead, said it was more practical." "And you agreed?" Zariah asked. "I was 18 and angry," Bryce shrugged. "I wanted to prove I could be successful without my father's approval or support. Building a tech empire seemed like the fastest way to do that. And now?" Zariah's voice was gentle. "Are you happy with the choice you made?" The question caught Bryce off guard. Was he happy? He had money, power, success, everything he'd thought he wanted. But happy? "I don't think about it much," he said finally. "I'm too busy." "Too busy to think about whether you're happy?" Zariah raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like a problem in itself." Before Bryce could respond, his phone rang. Seeing it was his executive assistant, he excused himself to take the call. "Sorry to bother you, Mr. Ellington, but there's an emergency board meeting. Mr. Patterson insists you attend in person." Bryce glanced at his watch. "I'll be there in 30 minutes. When he returned to the library, Zariah was gone, but the sketchbook was still on the desk. He picked it up, flipping through the pages of buildings he'd designed in his imagination, buildings that would never exist. As he was about to put it back on the shelf, he noticed something tucked into the last page. It was a small note, written in elegant handwriting. "You still could. It's not too late to create something that matters." Bryce stared at the note, feeling something shift inside him. He carefully folded it and put it in his wallet before heading out to the board meeting. The emergency meeting turned out to be a major crisis. One of Ellington AI's competitors had filed a patent infringement lawsuit, and the company's stock was already dropping in after-hours trading. "This could cost us millions," said James Patterson, the board chairman. "We need to get ahead of this immediately." Bryce spent the next 2 days locked in meetings with lawyers and executives, trying to contain the damage. He barely slept, running on coffee and adrenaline. By Friday morning, they had formulated a strategy, but Bryce was exhausted and irritable. When his mother called, he almost didn't answer. "Bryce," Eleanor's voice was tense. "We need to talk, in person." "I'm busy, Mother. There's a crisis at—" "This is more important," she cut him off. "It's about your—" Personal life. Something in her tone made Bryce's stomach tighten. What are you talking about? Not over the phone, Eleanor insisted. Come to the house. Now. Bryce arrived at his childhood home 30 minutes later, still wearing yesterday's rumpled suit. Eleanor was waiting in the formal living room, a tablet in her hands and a thunderous expression on her face. What's so urgent? Bryce asked, too tired for pleasantries. Without a word, Eleanor handed him the tablet. On the screen was a gossip website with the headline, Tech Billionaire Bryce Ellington, Hypocrisy or Romance. Exclusive photos of the man who said he'd never date a maid. Below were photos of him helping Zariah to his car the day she twisted her ankle, and another of him entering her apartment building. The article speculated wildly about their relationship, citing unnamed sources who claimed Bryce was infatuated with his cleaning lady. Explain this, Eleanor demanded, her voice ice-cold. There's nothing to explain, Bryce replied, though his heart was racing. She hurt her ankle at the house. I drove her home. End of story. Do you think I'm stupid? Eleanor snapped. I've been watching you change over the past month, suddenly working from home all the time, cancelling important meetings, looking distracted and distant at the gala. I've been busy with the company. Don't lie to me, Eleanor cut him off. I called Elite Cleaning Services. I know you requested her specifically for extra days. Bryce felt a surge of anger. You're spying on me now? I'm protecting you, Eleanor insisted. Just like I've always done. You're making the same mistake your father made, falling for someone beneath your station. Don't talk about Zariah like that, Bryce warned, his voice dangerously quiet. So there is something going on, Eleanor pounced on his defensive tone. Bryce, think about what you're doing. Think about the company, your reputation, everything you've worked for. Nothing is going on, Bryce insisted, though the words felt hollow even to his own ears. She's an intelligent, educated woman who had to put her dreams on hold to care for her sick mother. She deserves respect, not your condescension. Eleanor studied him for a moment, then her expression softened slightly. You care for her, she stated, not asking. Oh, Bryce, this can only end badly. You don't know that. I do, Eleanor said firmly, because I've seen it before. Your father thought he was in love with that waitress too. He threw away everything for her. And do you know what happened? 6 months later, she left him for someone else. By then, he'd lost his family, his reputation, his position in society. He died alone and broke. Bryce stared at his mother. Dad is dead. Eleanor looked away. 3 years ago. Heart attack. I didn't tell you because I knew you wouldn't care. The news hit Bryce harder than he expected. His father was gone, and he'd never have the chance to confront him, to ask him why he left, to make peace. You should have told me, he said quietly. Would it have made a difference? Eleanor asked skeptically. Would you have forgiven him? Bryce didn't answer. He honestly didn't know. I'm trying to save you from making the same mistake, Eleanor continued. This girl, Zariah, Bryce corrected. Zariah, Eleanor conceded. She's a distraction you can't afford right now. The company is facing a crisis. The board is already questioning your leadership because you've been so distant lately. And now these photos, she gestured to the tablet. Your reputation is at stake. What do you want me to do? Bryce asked tiredly. End it, Eleanor said firmly. Whatever it is, end it. Fire her. Find another cleaning service. Focus on what matters. The company, your future. She paused, then added, I'm saying this because I love you, Bryce. I don't want to see you throw everything away for a passing infatuation. Bryce stood silent, conflicted. Was his mother right? Was he risking everything he'd built for feelings he barely understood? And what about Zariah? The last thing he wanted was to drag her name through the mud of tabloid speculation. I need to get back to the office, he said finally. There's a crisis to manage. Promise me you'll think about what I said, Eleanor pressed. I'll think about it, Bryce agreed, though his heart felt heavy in his chest. As he drove back to his office, Zariah's note burned in his wallet. You still could. It's not too late to create something that matters. But what really mattered? His company, his reputation, or the unexpected feelings he had for a woman who saw beyond his wealth to the person he could be. By the time Monday came around, Bryce had made his decision. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't what his heart wanted, but he believed it was for the best for both of them. When Zariah arrived at his house that morning, Bryce was waiting for her in the kitchen, his face carefully neutral. Good morning, she greeted him with a smile that faltered when she saw his expression. Is everything okay? I need to speak with you, Bryce said formally. It's about your position here. Zariah set down her cleaning supplies, a wary look crossing her face. Okay. I'm going to be using a different cleaning service going forward, Bryce said, the rehearsed words tasting bitter in his mouth. "Today will be your last day." Zariah's eyes widened in shock. "What? Why? Did I do something wrong?" "No," Bryce said quickly. "Your work has been excellent. This is a personal decision." "Personal," Zariah repeated, her voice suddenly cool. "I see. I'll pay you for the full month, of course," Bryce continued, unable to meet her eyes. "And I've already spoken to Elite Cleaning. They'll reassign you to other clients immediately." "That's very considerate," Zariah said, but her voice held a hint of anger now. "May I ask what prompted this sudden decision?" Bryce hesitated. Should he tell her about the photos, about his mother's warnings, about the conflict raging inside him? "It's better this way," he said finally, "for both of us." Zariah stared at him for a long moment, hurt and confusion evident in her eyes. Then her expression hardened. "I understand perfectly," she said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "It wouldn't look good for someone like you to associate with someone like me. Not after what you said in that interview." "That's not it," Bryce protested, though part of him knew she wasn't entirely wrong. "Isn't it?" Zariah challenged. "Then what is it, Bryce? Because a week ago you were adding days to my schedule, and now you're firing me without explanation." "It's complicated," Bryce said lamely. "No, it's actually very simple," Zariah replied, her voice steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes. "You said it yourself in that interview. We're from different worlds. What would we even talk about, bleach and floors?" The echo of his own cruel words hit Bryce like a physical blow. "Zariah, please." "Don't," she cut him off, gathering her things. "You don't owe me an explanation. I'm just the maid, right? Easily replaced." "That's not how I see you," Bryce insisted, taking a step toward her. "It doesn't matter how you see me," Zariah replied, backing away from him. "What matters is that you're not brave enough to see yourself clearly, to be the person you could be, instead of the person others expect you to be." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Bryce, but I don't think you will as long as you keep looking in the wrong places." And with that, she was gone, leaving Bryce alone in his beautiful, empty mansion, surrounded by success that suddenly felt meaningless. Max came padding into the kitchen, looking around expectantly for Zariah. When he didn't find her, he whined softly and looked up at Bryce with accusing eyes. "I know, buddy," Bryce said quietly, kneeling to pet the dog. "I miss her too, but it's for the best." Even as he said the words, he didn't believe them, but he had made his choice. He was Bryce Ellington, tech billionaire, not some dreamy architect who could afford to follow his heart. He had a company to save, a reputation to protect, and a life to return to, the life he had built for himself, the life that had seemed perfect, until Zariah Moore walked in and made him question everything. 2 weeks after firing Zariah, Bryce sat alone in his office staring at the untouched sandwich his assistant had brought him for lunch. He hadn't had much of an appetite lately, or much interest in anything, really. On paper, things were going well. The patent lawsuit had been settled out of court for much less than they'd feared. Ellington AI stock was climbing again. The board was happy with his leadership, but Bryce felt empty. His new cleaning service was efficient and professional. The house was spotless. And yet, every time he came home, he found himself listening for a voice that wasn't there, looking for a smile he wouldn't see. "Mr. Ellington?" His assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Your mother is here to see you." Bryce sighed. "Send her in." Eleanor Ellington swept into the office, immaculately dressed as always. "You look terrible," she said by way of greeting. "Nice to see you too, Mother," Bryce replied dryly. "Have you been sleeping?" She examined him critically. "You have circles under your eyes." "I've been busy," Bryce said, gesturing to the stack of papers on his desk. "What brings you here?" Eleanor smiled, looking more relaxed than Bryce had seen her in years. "I wanted to invite you to dinner this weekend. The Wilsons will be there. Audrey has been asking about you." "I'm not interested in Audrey," Bryce said flatly. "Don't be difficult, darling," Eleanor sighed. "She's perfect for you, beautiful, educated, from an excellent family." "Stop trying to manage my personal life," Bryce snapped, his patience wearing thin. "I'm not a teenager anymore." "I'm trying to help you," Eleanor insisted. "You've been so distracted lately. Even with that cleaning girl gone." "Her name is Zariah," Bryce interrupted coldly, "and I don't want to talk about her." Eleanor studied him for a moment, then her expression softened. "You did the right thing, Bryce, ending it before it began. Trust me, I know how these things go." "Like with Dad?" Bryce asked, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. Eleanor's face hardened. Yes, exactly like with your father. He threw everything away for that woman, and look how that turned out. You said she left him, Bryce remarked, but you never told me why. Does it matter? Eleanor waved dismissively. She wasn't right for him. She never belonged in our world. Something about her tone made Bryce suspicious. What really happened between Dad and… what was her name? You never even told me that. Lisa, Eleanor said, the name sounding like poison on her lips. Lisa Cortez, a waitress at that restaurant he loved. She looked away. And what happened is exactly what I told you. She left him for someone else. After only 6 months? Bryce pressed, watching his mother's face carefully. That seems fast. Eleanor stood abruptly. I didn't come here to discuss ancient history. Dinner on Saturday, 7 o'clock. Please be there. After she left, Bryce sat at his desk thinking about his father. Richard Ellington had been a successful businessman, respected in the community. He had seemed happy, at least in Bryce's childhood memories. Then one day, he was just gone. Bryce's mother had said he left for another woman, and Bryce had never questioned it, until now. On impulse, Bryce picked up his phone and called James Patterson, the board chairman, who had been his father's friend and business partner. James, I need to ask you something about my father. That evening, Bryce sat in his home office, a tumbler of whiskey in his hand and a folder of old papers on his desk. His conversation with James Patterson had left him shaken. Your father was a good man, Bryce, James had told him. What happened wasn't as simple as your mother made it seem. Yes, he fell in love with Lisa, but there was more to the story. Your mother, well, she didn't take it well. According to James, Eleanor had been furious when Richard asked for a divorce. She had threatened to destroy him socially and financially if he left her. When he insisted on going anyway, she had used her family connections to have Lisa fired from her job. Then she had approached Lisa directly. I don't know exactly what was said, James admitted, but a week later Lisa was gone and Richard was devastated. He tried to find her, but she seemed to have vanished. Your mother took him back, but things were never the same between them. When he finally left for good 2 years later, he had nothing. Eleanor made sure of that. Bryce took a long swallow of whiskey, trying to process this new version of events. Had his mother driven Lisa away? Had she deliberately destroyed his father's happiness out of pride and possessiveness? And more importantly, was she doing the same thing to him now? The folder on his desk contained his father's personal papers, which James had kept after Richard's death. Among them was a small address book. Flipping through it, Bryce found an entry that made his heart race. Lisa C., followed by a phone number with a Los Angeles area code. Before he could talk himself out of it, Bryce dialed the number. It rang several times and he was about to hang up when a woman's voice answered. Hello? Hello? Bryce said, suddenly nervous. Is this Lisa Cortez? A pause. Who's asking? My name is Bryce Ellington. Richard Ellington was my father. Another longer pause. Bryce, the woman said finally, her voice softening. I never thought I'd hear from you. So you are Lisa? Bryce pressed. Yes, she confirmed. Though it's Lisa Martinez now. I remarried years ago. I'd like to talk to you, Bryce said, about my father, about what really happened. There was silence on the other end then. It's been almost 20 years, Bryce. Why now? Because I think I'm making the same mistake my father did, Bryce admitted. Only in reverse. The next day, Bryce sat in a quiet cafe in Silver Lake, waiting nervously. When a woman in her 50s with warm brown eyes and streaks of grey in her black hair approached his table, he knew immediately it was Lisa. You look just like him, she said softly as she sat down across from him. Thank you for meeting me, Bryce replied. I know this must be strange. Very, Lisa agreed with a small smile. The last time I saw you, you were a little boy. Bryce was surprised. You met me? A few times, Lisa nodded. Your father would bring you to the restaurant where I worked. You loved the chocolate cake. Her smile faded. But I suppose your mother never told you that. My mother never told me a lot of things, Bryce said grimly, like what really happened between you and my father. Lisa was quiet for a moment, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. What did she tell you? That you left him for someone else after 6 months? That he died alone and broke? Lisa's eyes flashed with anger. That's not what happened. Over the next hour, Lisa told Bryce a very different story. She and Richard had fallen in love, yes. But when he decided to leave Eleanor, things had turned ugly. Your mother came to see me, Lisa explained. She told me Richard would lose everything if he left her, his company, his reputation, access to you. She said she would make sure he never saw you again. Lisa's eyes grew sad. Then she offered me money to disappear. A lot of money. And you took it? Bryce asked, trying to keep the judgment from his voice. No, Lisa said firmly. I refused, but then I lost my job. My landlord suddenly evicted me. My family started receiving threatening calls. It became clear that your mother would stop at nothing to get her way. So you left, Bryce concluded. I left, Lisa nodded. Not for someone else, but because I couldn't bear to be the reason Richard lost everything, especially you. He loved you so much, Bryce. But he left anyway, Bryce pointed out. 2 years later. By then it was too late for us, Lisa sighed. I was married to someone else, trying to rebuild my life. Richard reached out once about 10 years ago. He was sick by then. James told me he died of a heart attack, Bryce said. 3 years ago, Lisa confirmed. He called me near the end. Wanted to make peace, I think. He talked about you a lot, how proud he was of what you'd accomplished. Bryce felt a lump in his throat. I never gave him a chance to tell me that himself. He understood, Lisa assured him, but he regretted not fighting harder. For me, for his own happiness, for a relationship with you. His biggest regret was letting your mother control his life for so long. She studied Bryce carefully. You said on the phone that you might be making the same mistake he did. What did you mean? Bryce took a deep breath and told her about Zariah, about how they met, how his feelings had developed, and how he had pushed her away because of his mother's warnings and his fear of scandal. She made me see myself differently, Bryce explained. She didn't care about my money or my status. She saw me, the real me, and I was too much of a coward to stand up for what I wanted. It's not too late, Lisa said gently. Don't make the same mistake your father and I did. Don't let pride and fear keep you from happiness. I fired her, Bryce reminded her. Said terrible things. She probably hates me now. Maybe, Lisa acknowledged. But if she's as special as you say, she might also understand. People make mistakes, Bryce. The question is whether you're brave enough to try and fix yours. When Bryce returned to his mansion that evening, he saw it with new eyes. The expensive furniture, the pristine decor, the emptiness of it all. This wasn't a home. It was a showcase, a monument to success that felt increasingly hollow. Max padded over to greet him, but even the dog seemed subdued. He sniffed Bryce's legs, then looked toward the door expectantly. She's not coming back, buddy, Bryce said sadly, kneeling to pet him. At least not unless I do something about it. In his office, Bryce found the sketchbook Zariah had discovered. He flipped through it, remembering the joy he'd once felt in designing buildings, in creating spaces for people to live and work and thrive. When he reached the last page, he reread Zariah's note. You still could. It's not too late to create something that matters. What really mattered to him? His company? His reputation? Or being true to himself and finding happiness with someone who saw his true worth? The answer was suddenly, blindingly clear. Bryce spent the next hour making calls to his assistant, cancelling all his meetings for the next week, to James Patterson discussing a temporary leave of absence from the company, and finally to Elite Cleaning Services. I'm trying to reach Zariah Moore, he told the receptionist. It's important. I'm sorry, sir, but Ms. Moore no longer works for us, came the surprising reply. She left 2 weeks ago. Bryce felt a jolt of panic. Do you have a forwarding number or address where I can reach her? I'm afraid we can't give out that information, sir. After hanging up, Bryce paced his office, trying to think. Where would Zariah go? How could he find her? Then he remembered. Her mother. Loretta would know where Zariah was, but when he drove to the apartment building in East Hollywood, he discovered that the Moores had moved out. The neighbor across the hall told him they had left shortly after Zariah quit her job at the cleaning service. Do you know where they went? Bryce asked desperately. The woman shook her head. Zariah mentioned something about a fresh start. That's all I know. Driving back home, Bryce felt a crushing sense of loss. Zariah was gone, and he had no way to find her, no way to tell her how wrong he'd been, how sorry he was. When he arrived at his mansion, he was surprised to find his mother's car in the driveway. Eleanor was rarely spontaneous. Her visits were always planned well in advance. He found her in the living room, pacing nervously. Mother, he greeted her coolly, this is unexpected. Eleanor turned to face him, her expression unusually anxious. Where have you been? I've been calling you all day. I had some personal business to attend to, Bryce replied vaguely. What's so urgent? James Patterson called me, Eleanor said, her voice tight. He said you're taking a leave of absence from the company. Is that true? Yes, Bryce confirmed. I need some time to figure things out. Figure what out? Eleanor demanded. The company needs you, especially after that lawsuit. The board will see this as weakness. I don't care, Bryce said simply. There are more important things than the company. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Like what? That cleaning girl? Her name is Zariah, Bryce said firmly. And yes, partly because of her, but also because of Dad. Eleanor went very still. What about your father? I know what really happened, Bryce said, watching his mother's face carefully. I spoke to Lisa today. The color drained from Eleanor's face. You what? Lisa Cortez, or Martinez now, Bryce clarified. She told me everything. How you threatened Dad with losing me. How you had her fired, evicted, harassed. How you destroyed their relationship because you couldn't stand the thought of him being happy without you. She's lying, Eleanor said quickly. That woman always was a manipulative... Stop it, Bryce cut her off. James confirmed it. Dad's old friends confirmed it. Everyone knew except me because I was too angry, too hurt to ask questions. He stepped closer to his mother. And now you're trying to do the same thing to me, trying to control my life, my choices, my happiness. So I'm trying to protect you, Eleanor insisted. This girl Zariah, she's using you. She sees your money, your position. No, Bryce interrupted firmly. That's what you see. All you care about is status and appearances. Zariah saw me, the real me, the person I could be if I stopped living according to your expectations. Eleanor's expression hardened. So, you've made your choice. Yes, Bryce nodded. I have. I choose to be happy. I choose to follow my heart, even if it's scary. I choose to be brave like Dad should have been. And where is this paragon of virtue now? Eleanor asked sarcastically. Your precious Zariah? I don't know, Bryce admitted, the pain evident in his voice. She's gone. She quit her job, moved out of her apartment. I can't find her. A strange expression crossed Eleanor's face, something almost like satisfaction. What did you do? Bryce asked suddenly, a chill running down his spine. I don't know what you mean, Eleanor replied, but she wouldn't meet his eyes. Mother, Bryce said, his voice dangerously quiet. What did you do to Zariah? Eleanor squared her shoulders defensively. I did what was necessary, what you weren't strong enough to do yourself. Which was what exactly? Bryce demanded, his anger rising. I offered her money, Eleanor admitted. A lot of money, enough to take care of her mother's medical bills and finish her education. All she had to do was leave and never contact you again. Bryce felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. You bribed her to leave. I gave her an opportunity, Eleanor corrected. A way out of her difficult situation that benefited everyone. Did she take it? Bryce asked, though he already knew the answer. Zariah was too proud, too principled to accept such an offer. No, Eleanor admitted, looking genuinely puzzled. She refused, said she wouldn't be bought. Very self-righteous about it. She smoothed her skirt. But the point is, she's gone anyway, so you can put this ridiculous infatuation behind you and focus on what's important. Bryce stared at his mother, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time in his life. The controlling, manipulative woman who had driven away his father and now tried to do the same with Zariah. Get out, he said quietly. Eleanor blinked in surprise. Excuse me? Get out of my house, Bryce repeated, his voice stronger. Now, and don't come back until you're ready to apologize and respect my decisions. You don't mean that, Eleanor scoffed. You're upset, but you'll see I was right. No, Bryce shook his head. I won't. Because you're not right. You're lonely and bitter and terrified of being left behind, so you try to control everyone around you, no matter who gets hurt in the process. He took a deep breath. I love you, Mother. You're my family, but I won't let you dictate my life anymore. Eleanor's face was a mask of shock and fury. Without another word, she grabbed her purse and stormed out of the house. After she left, Bryce sank onto the sofa, emotionally drained. His mother had tried to bribe Zariah to leave, and Zariah had refused. She had principles, integrity, and he had fired her anyway, proving he didn't deserve her. But she was still gone, and he had no idea how to find her. The next few weeks were a blur of change for Bryce. True to his word, he took a leave of absence from Ellington AI, appointing James Patterson as interim CEO. He sold his mansion and bought a smaller, cozier house with a yard for Max, and he enrolled in architecture classes at the local college. It felt strange at first, being a student again at 30, but as he immersed himself in designs and blueprints, Bryce felt a passion rekindled that had been dormant for years. This was what he had always wanted to do, before ambition and anger had led him down a different path. He also started therapy, working through his issues with abandonment and trust. Slowly, he began to understand himself better, why he had pushed Zariah away, why he had been so afraid of his feelings for her. It wasn't because she wasn't good enough. he admitted to his therapist one day. It was because I was afraid she was better than me, more authentic, more principled. I was afraid of not measuring up to her. Despite these positive changes, there was still an emptiness in Bryce's life. He continued searching for Zariah, hiring a private investigator who came up empty. It was as if she and her mother had vanished. Then, 3 months after Zariah left, Bryce saw a small notice in the local arts section of the newspaper. Community Visionaries, Emerging Architectural Designs. The exhibition at a small gallery in downtown LA featured works by new and undiscovered talents, and among the featured designers was Zariah Moore. Bryce's heart raced as he read the brief biography. Zariah Moore, a recent graduate of Howard University's architecture program, brings a fresh perspective to community-focused design. Her centerpiece, Healing Spaces, reimagines urban healthcare facilities as welcoming, restorative environments. She had finished her degree. She was pursuing her dream. Bryce felt a surge of pride mixed with regret. She had done it without him, proving she never needed his help or approval. The exhibition opening was that Friday evening. Bryce spent the next 3 days in a state of nervous anticipation. Should he go? Would she even want to see him? What would he say? In the end, there was never really a choice. He had to see her again, even if only from a distance, even if she turned away from him. He had to try. Friday evening found Bryce standing outside the small gallery, the old sketchbook clutched in his hand. He had brought it as a peace offering, a symbol of the changes he had made, the journey he had begun. Taking a deep breath, he walked inside. The gallery was crowded with people admiring the various architectural models and drawings. Bryce moved through the space slowly, searching for Zariah, and then he saw her. She stood near a large, detailed model of a building, explaining her design to a small group of attentive listeners. She looked different, more confident, more radiant. Her hair was styled in elegant braids, and she wore a simple but beautiful blue dress. Bryce hung back, not wanting to interrupt. He watched as she gestured animatedly, her passion for her work evident in every movement. This was who she was meant to be, not a maid, but a creator, a visionary. When the group moved on, Zariah was left alone for a moment. Bryce gathered his courage and approached her. "Zariah," he said softly. She turned, and the smile on her face froze as she recognized him. A series of emotions crossed her features: surprise, confusion, wariness. "Bryce," she said finally, "what are you doing here?" "I saw your name in the paper," he explained. "I wanted to see your work, and to see you." Zariah's expression was guarded. "Why?" Bryce took a deep breath and held out the sketchbook. "Because I took your advice. It wasn't too late to create something that matters." Zariah looked at the sketchbook, then back at his face, clearly confused. "I left the company," Bryce explained. "I'm studying architecture now, starting over." He paused. "You inspired me to follow my dream, to be true to myself. I just wish—" He swallowed hard. "I wish I had been brave enough to do it without losing you first." Zariah was silent for a long moment, studying him. "You look different," she finally said. "I feel different," Bryce admitted. "I've been doing a lot of thinking these past few months. About who I am, what I want, about the mistakes I made with you." Around them, people continued to move through the gallery, but Bryce barely noticed them. All he could see was Zariah. "I lied," he said suddenly. "That day, when I said dating a maid was insane, it wasn't. It was the first time I felt anything real." Zariah's eyes widened at his words. She looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, "You didn't think I was enough to stand beside you, but I never needed to." "I know that now," Bryce nodded. "You never needed me or my approval. You're extraordinary all on your own." He took a step closer. "But I need you, Zariah. You make me want to be better, to be the man I was always meant to be." Zariah was quiet, processing his words. Then she gestured to her architectural model. "What do you think of my design?" The question caught Bryce off guard, but he recovered quickly. He examined the model carefully, noting the innovative use of space, the emphasis on natural light, the healing garden at the center. "It's beautiful," he said sincerely. "The way you've integrated the outdoor spaces with the treatment areas is brilliant. It feels hopeful, like a place where healing could happen naturally." A small smile touched Zariah's lips. "That was the idea. My mum's treatments were always in these sterile, depressing places. I wanted to create something different." "How is your mother?" Bryce asked. "Better," Zariah replied. "The new treatment is working well. She's even teaching part-time again." "I'm glad," Bryce said. An awkward silence fell between them. Finally, he gathered his courage. "Zariah, I know I hurt you. I know I was a coward. And I'll understand if you never want to see me again. But I had to tell you that I'm sorry. And that meeting you changed my life." Zariah studied him for a long moment. "People don't change overnight, Bryce." "It hasn't been overnight," he pointed out. "It's been 3 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days since you walked out of my house, and I've thought about you every single day." Despite herself, Zariah's lips quirked in a small smile. "You've been counting the days. Pathetic, isn't it?" Bryce smiled self-deprecatingly. "A little," Zariah agreed, but her eyes had softened. Another silence fell between them, less awkward this time. Finally, Bryce asked the question that had been burning inside him. "My mother told me she offered you money to stay away from me." Zariah's expression darkened. "She did. A lot of money. But you turned it down," Bryce said. "Why?" "Because I'm not for sale," Zariah replied simply. "And neither are my feelings." Bryce nodded, his admiration for her growing even stronger. "I confronted her about it. We're not speaking right now." "I'm sorry," Zariah said, and she seemed to mean it. "Don't be." Bryce shook his head. "It was long overdue." He hesitated, then added, "She did the same thing to my father and the woman he loved, drove them apart. I didn't want history to repeat itself." "And yet you fired me anyway," Zariah pointed out, a hint of hurt returning to her voice. "My biggest mistake," Bryce admitted, "one I've regretted every day since." He took a deep breath. "I was afraid, Zariah, not of what others would think, but of how you made me feel, of wanting something, someone so much that losing them would destroy me." Zariah was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "I understand fear, Bryce, but at some point you have to decide if what you want is worth the risk." "You are," Bryce said without hesitation, "more than worth it." Around them, the gallery had begun to empty as the event wound down. They stood together in a bubble of private emotion amid the public space. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Bryce continued. "I'm not even asking for a second chance. I just wanted you to know that you changed me, Zariah. You made me see myself clearly for the first time in years, and whether or not I'm part of your life going forward, I'll always be grateful for that." Zariah looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she glanced at her watch. "The gallery is closing soon." Bryce nodded, trying to hide his disappointment. "Of course. I should let you get back to your other guests." He turned to leave, his heart heavy when Zariah's voice stopped him. "There's a coffee shop across the street," she said. "If you wanted to continue this conversation." Bryce turned back, hope flaring in his chest. "I'd like that very much." As they gathered their things to leave, Bryce knew that one coffee wouldn't erase his mistakes or guarantee a future with Zariah, but it was a start, a chance to rebuild trust, to show her the man he was becoming, and for now, that chance was enough. The coffee shop was quiet, with only a few customers lingering over late-night lattes. Bryce and Zariah sat in a corner booth, 2 steaming mugs between them, and 3 months of unsaid words hanging in the air. "So your exhibition was impressive," Bryce said, breaking the silence. "You've accomplished so much in such a short time." "Thank you," Zariah replied. "After I left Elite Cleaning, I applied for a special completion program at Howard. They allowed me to finish my degree remotely while working on my designs." "That's amazing," Bryce said sincerely. "I always knew you were talented." Zariah studied him over the rim of her coffee cup. "And what about you? You said you left the company." "Temporary leave of absence," Bryce clarified. "James Patterson is running things for now. I needed time to figure out what I really want." "And is architecture what you really want?" Zariah asked. Bryce nodded. "It feels right in a way the tech world never did. I'm just a beginner again, but—" He smiled slightly. "It's the first time in years I've been excited about learning something new." "I'm glad," Zariah said, and she seemed to mean it. "Everyone should have the chance to pursue what makes them happy." Another silence fell between them, more comfortable than the last. Bryce took the opportunity to really look at Zariah. She seemed different, more confident, more at peace. Her success had given her a glow that made her even more beautiful. "I looked for you," Bryce admitted suddenly. "After you left, I went to your apartment, but you were gone. We moved." Zariah nodded. "My mum's doctor recommended a treatment center in Pasadena, so we found a place nearby. I hired a private investigator," Bryce continued, a bit embarrassed now. "He couldn't find you either." Zariah raised an eyebrow. "A private investigator? Really?" "I was desperate," Bryce shrugged. "I needed to tell you how sorry I was, how wrong I'd been." Zariah's expression grew serious. "Why did you fire me, Bryce? The real reason." Bryce took a deep breath. This was the moment of truth, literally. There were photos, he began, of us. Someone took pictures of me helping you to the car that day you hurt your ankle, and of us going to your apartment. They ended up on a gossip website with speculation about our relationship. And that bothered you, Zariah stated, not asked. Not in the way you think, Bryce replied quickly. I didn't care what people said about me, but I didn't want your name dragged through the mud. So you were protecting me? Zariah sounded skeptical. Partly, Bryce admitted, but I was also protecting myself. My mother showed me the photos, reminded me of what happened with my father, warned me about the company's reputation. He sighed, and I was afraid. Of what people would think. Of how much I felt for you, Bryce said quietly. I've never been good at relationships, Zariah. I keep people at a distance. It's safer that way. But with you, he met her eyes directly. With you, all my walls came down, and that terrified me. Zariah was silent for a moment, processing his words. So you pushed me away before I could get too close? Yes, Bryce nodded. It was cowardly and stupid. I hurt you to protect myself. Yes, you did, Zariah agreed, but there was no anger in her voice, just honest acknowledgement. What about you, Bryce asked. After I fired you, what happened? Zariah traced the rim of her coffee mug with her finger. I was hurt, angry. I thought I'd misjudged you completely. She looked up at him. Then your mother showed up at my apartment. With her bribe, Bryce nodded grimly. She called it an opportunity, Zariah said with a small, humorless smile. She said I could finish my degree, take care of my mom, start fresh somewhere else. All I had to do was stay away from you forever. I'm so sorry, Bryce said, shame washing over him. When she told me what she'd done, it wasn't your fault, Zariah cut him off. You didn't send her. But I didn't stand up to her either, Bryce pointed out. Not until it was too late. Why did you stand up to her finally? Zariah asked, curious. Bryce thought about it. Because I realized she'd been controlling my life for years, just like she'd controlled my father's. And because, he hesitated, then decided to be completely honest. Because I loved you, and I couldn't let her take that away from me, even if you never felt the same way. The word loved hung in the air between them. Zariah's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't comment on his use of the past tense. What happened after you refused her money? Bryce asked, wanting to change the subject. I quit elite cleaning that same day, Zariah replied. I was already on the waiting list for the degree completion program at Howard. When they accepted me, my mom and I decided to move closer to her new treatment center. She smiled slightly. It was a fresh start for both of us. And now you're a featured architect in a gallery exhibition, Bryce said proudly. That's incredible, Zariah. It's just a small community gallery, she demurred. It's the beginning, Bryce insisted. The first step of an amazing career. They talked for another hour, catching up on the past 3 months. Zariah told him about her mother's improving health, her struggles to complete her degree while working part-time as a tutor, and her dreams for the future. Bryce shared stories about his architecture classes, his new, smaller house, and how Max still looked for Zariah every time the front door opened. When the coffee shop announced they were closing, Bryce and Zariah reluctantly gathered their things to leave. Can I see you again? Bryce asked as they stood outside on the sidewalk. Maybe dinner next week. As friends, he added quickly, not wanting to pressure her. Zariah considered for a moment. I'd like that, she said finally. As friends. It wasn't everything Bryce wanted, but it was a start, a chance to rebuild what he had broken. I'll call you, he said, then realized, I don't have your new number. Zariah smiled and held out her hand. Give me your phone. As she programmed her number into his contacts, Bryce felt a surge of hope. She was giving him a second chance. Not at a relationship, perhaps, but at being part of her life. And for now, that was enough. Over the next few weeks, Bryce and Zariah began rebuilding their connection, slowly and carefully. They met for dinner, visited museums together, and even took Max for walks in the park. They talked about architecture, shared books they loved, and gradually reopened the channels of communication that had been severed when Bryce fired her. But they were just friends. Zariah maintained a careful distance, and Bryce respected it, never pushing for more than she was willing to give. One evening, as they were leaving a lecture on sustainable urban design, Zariah asked, Have you spoken to your mother? Bryce shook his head. Not since I told her to get out of my house. She's called a few times, but I'm not ready to talk to her yet. You should, Zariah said gently. She's still your mother. After what she did to you, to my father. Bryce was surprised by her suggestion. I'm not saying forgive and forget, Zariah clarified. But she's your family, Bryce. The only blood family you have left. Why do you care? Bryce asked, genuinely curious. Because I know what it's like to have a complicated relationship with a parent, Zariah explained. My dad was an alcoholic before he got sober. There were years when I couldn't stand to be in the same room with him, but I'm grateful every day that we reconciled before he died. Bryce considered her words. I'll think about it, he promised. The next day, Bryce called his mother and agreed to meet her for lunch. Eleanor looked older somehow, more fragile when she arrived at the restaurant. Thank you for seeing me, she said, as she sat down across from him. Her usual confidence was subdued. Zariah thought I should, Bryce replied honestly. Eleanor's eyebrows rose in surprise. You're still seeing her? As friends, Bryce nodded. And if you say one negative word about her, I'm leaving. Eleanor held up her hands in surrender. I won't, She hesitated, then said, I've been doing some thinking since our last conversation. And? Bryce prompted when she didn't continue. And I may have been wrong, Eleanor admitted, the words clearly difficult for her. About Zariah, about your father, about a lot of things. Bryce was stunned. He had never heard his mother admit to being wrong about anything. What brought this on? He asked suspiciously. Eleanor sighed. After you threw me out, I was angry, hurt. I went to see James Patterson to complain about him supporting your leave of absence. She looked down at her hands. He told me some hard truths about myself, about how I've driven away everyone who cared about me with my controlling behavior. James said that? Bryce was surprised. In kinder words, but yes, Eleanor nodded. He also suggested I see a therapist. She gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. Me in therapy. Can you imagine? Are you going? Bryce asked. 3 sessions so far, Eleanor confirmed. It's uncomfortable, but perhaps necessary. They ate in silence for a while, both processing this new dynamic between them. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Eleanor said finally. Not yet. I know I've done too much damage for that, but I would like a chance to try and be better, to be part of your life again, on your terms. Bryce studied his mother's face, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity, but all he saw was vulnerability and genuine regret. I'd like that too, he said quietly, but things have to be different. You have to respect my choices, my independence. I'll try, Eleanor promised. It won't be easy. Old habits and all that. And if Zariah ever decides to be more than friends, Bryce continued, you will treat her with respect. Always. Eleanor nodded slowly. I understand. She hesitated, then added, for what it's worth, she impressed me. Not many people would turn down that much money on principle. Coming from Eleanor, it was high praise indeed. As they parted outside the restaurant, Eleanor surprised Bryce by hugging him briefly. I do love you, she said, in my flawed, controlling way. I know, Bryce replied, and he did. For all her faults, Eleanor loved her son. She just didn't know how to love without trying to control. A month later, Bryce received exciting news. A design he had submitted for a class project had caught the attention of his professor, who recommended it for a small local competition. To Bryce's surprise, his concept for an affordable housing complex with integrated green spaces won 3rd place. The first person he called was Zariah. That's amazing, she exclaimed when he told her. Bryce, I'm so proud of you. Will you come to the awards ceremony with me? He asked impulsively. It's next Saturday night. I'd be honored, Zariah replied warmly. The night of the ceremony, Bryce picked Zariah up at her new apartment. When she opened the door, wearing a simple but elegant red dress, his breath caught in his throat. You look beautiful, he said softly. Thank you, she replied with a smile. You clean up pretty well yourself. The ceremony was held at a downtown hotel ballroom. As they entered, Bryce was surprised to see his mother already there, chatting with some of the judges. I didn't know she was coming, he told Zariah, suddenly anxious. I did, Zariah admitted. She called me yesterday, asked if I thought it would be okay if she attended. Bryce stared at her in shock. My mother called you? Hard to believe, I know, Zariah laughed. But she seemed genuinely excited about your achievement. When Eleanor spotted them, she made her way over. She was polite, even warm, greeting Zariah with a brief hug that left both women looking slightly uncomfortable, but determined to make an effort. Congratulations, Bryce, Eleanor said proudly. James is here too. We're both so impressed with what you've accomplished. The ceremony was a blur for Bryce. When they called his name for 3rd place, he accepted the award with a brief speech thanking his professors, his mentor James, and the woman who reminded me it's never too late to create something that matters. at which point he looked directly at Zariah, who blushed but held his gaze. At the reception afterward, James Patterson pulled Bryce aside. "I have a proposition for you," he said. "The board misses your leadership, but we all recognize that you're passionate about this new direction." "What are you suggesting?" Bryce asked. "Come back part-time," James proposed. 3 days a week. Use your tech expertise to guide the company, but have the freedom to pursue your architectural studies the rest of the time." "And the board approved this arrangement?" Bryce was skeptical. "Unanimously," James confirmed. "Even your mother voted yes." Bryce glanced across the room where Eleanor was chatting with Zariah. They weren't exactly relaxed together, but they were making an effort. It was more than he could have hoped for a month ago. "I'll think about it," Bryce promised James. Later, as he drove Zariah home, Bryce told her about James's offer. "What do you think I should do?" he asked. "What do you want to do?" Zariah countered. Bryce considered the question carefully. "I think I'd like to try it. I don't want to abandon the company I built, but I also don't want to give up architecture." "Then do both," Zariah said simply. "You don't have to choose one path to the exclusion of all others. Life isn't that black and white." When they reached her apartment, Bryce walked Zariah to her door. "Thank you for coming tonight," he said. "It meant a lot to have you there." "I wouldn't have missed it," Zariah replied warmly. They stood looking at each other for a long moment. Bryce wanted desperately to kiss her, but he had promised himself he wouldn't rush her, wouldn't pressure her. "Good night, Zariah," he said finally, turning to leave. "Bryce," she called after him. When he turned back, she asked, "Are you ever going to kiss me, or are we going to keep pretending we're just friends forever?" Bryce stared at her, his heart pounding. I thought that's what you wanted." "What I wanted," Zariah said, stepping closer to him, "was for you to prove that you had changed, that you were truly sorry for what happened, that you could see me, really see me, as your equal." "And have I?" Bryce asked, hardly daring to hope. "You have?" Zariah nodded, her eyes soft. "You're not the same man who fired me that day. You're not even the same man who said he'd never date a maid." "No," Bryce agreed, closing the distance between them. "I'm not." When their lips finally met, it felt like coming home. All the months of separation, of regret and longing, melted away in the warmth of their embrace. "I love you," Bryce whispered when they finally broke apart. "I never stopped loving you." "I know," Zariah replied with a small smile. "I just needed to be sure you were ready to admit it, to yourself and to the world." 6 months later, Bryce stood nervously in front of a crowd gathered for the opening of the Loretta Moore Memorial Health Center. After Zariah's mother passed away from complications of MS, Bryce had used his resources and connections to help Zariah realize her dream project, a community health center designed with the principles of healing architecture she had been developing since college. "This center represents not just my mother's legacy," Zariah was saying at the podium, "but a new approach to healthcare spaces, one where the environment itself contributes to healing." She looked radiant in a blue suit, her confidence and passion evident in every word she spoke. Bryce watched her with pride and love, still amazed sometimes that she had given him a second chance. In the front row, Eleanor sat beside James Patterson. She had been making genuine efforts to change, continuing her therapy and slowly rebuilding her relationship with Bryce. She and Zariah would probably never be close, but they had reached a place of mutual respect. After the speeches and the ribbon cutting, as people toured the beautiful new facility, Bryce pulled Zariah aside to a quiet corner of the garden she had designed as the heart of the center. "This is incredible," he told her, gesturing to the space around them. "You're incredible." "We did it together," Zariah reminded him. "Your technological innovations for patient monitoring, my design concepts. We make a good team," Bryce agreed, taking her hand in his, "which is why I was hoping." He took a deep breath and knelt down on one knee, pulling a small box from his pocket. Zariah's eyes widened as he opened it to reveal a simple but elegant diamond ring. "Zariah Moore," Bryce said, his voice steady despite the nerves fluttering in his stomach. "You changed my life the day you walked into my house. You saw past my walls, past my pride, past my mistakes. You made me want to be a better man." He held the ring up to her. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears shimmered in Zariah's eyes. "Are you sure? A former maid as Mrs. Ellington?" "I've never been more sure of anything," Bryce replied without hesitation. "And you were never just a maid to me. You were the woman who taught me what really matters in life." Zariah smiled through her tears. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger and stood to kiss her, Cheers erupted around them. They turned to see the opening ceremony attendees watching from the garden entrance, Eleanor among them, a genuine smile on her face. Later at the reception, Eleanor approached them with 2 glasses of champagne. "Congratulations," she said, handing them each a glass. "I'm very happy for you both." "Thank you, Mother," Bryce said, genuinely touched by her sincerity. Eleanor turned to Zariah. "I know we've had our differences, but I want you to know that I respect the woman my son has chosen." She hesitated, then added, "And I hope in time we might become family in more than just name." "I'd like that," Zariah replied, surprising both Eleanor and Bryce with her warmth. As Eleanor moved away to speak with other guests, Bryce pulled Zariah close. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly. "About us? About my mother? About us? Absolutely," Zariah said firmly. "About your mother? We'll take it one day at a time." She smiled up at him. "But I believe in second chances. After all, I gave you one. The best decision you ever made," Bryce teased, kissing her lightly. "No," Zariah corrected him. "The best decision was walking into your house that first day, even after I'd seen that awful interview." She stroked his cheek gently. "Sometimes the most important journeys begin with the most unlikely first steps." As they mingled with their guests, Bryce found himself reflecting on the strange path that had led them here, from his arrogant dismissal of ever dating someone beneath him to falling deeply in love with the woman who had shown him what true worth really meant. Life had a way of teaching the most profound lessons in the most unexpected packages. And Bryce Ellington, once so certain he knew everything about success and value, had learned that the greatest wealth came not from what you owned, but from who you loved, and who loved you in return. That evening, as they stood together on the balcony of the health center, looking out at the city lights, Bryce wrapped his arms around Zariah from behind. "Do you remember what you asked me that night at the gallery?" he murmured against her ear. "You asked if I was there to save you. And you said no," Zariah recalled, leaning back against him. "You said you were there to apologize and to ask if I would let you walk beside me." "I didn't realize then," Bryce said softly, "that you were the one saving me." Zariah turned in his arms to face him. "We saved each other," she corrected him, "and now we build something together, a life, a future." As their lips met in a tender kiss, Bryce knew with absolute certainty that he had found something far more valuable than all his wealth and success combined. He had found a love that didn't demand perfection, but inspired growth. A love that saw his flaws and his potential with equal clarity. A love, quite simply, that mattered. The end.